Welcome back to the Female Fitness Podcast. I'm your host, Danny, as always. And in today's podcast, I'm actually going to cover a request from a listener, which I really appreciate. So, as always, if you're listening to this podcast right now and you're thinking, I'd really like to hear you speak about a certain topic, please reach out to me. Like, I absolutely love hearing from you guys. And I've received some really lovely messages from you recently and it genuinely means the absolute world. So thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. This message from one of you said that they admired how consistent I am with the content that I put out into the world and the quality of that content that I'm able to maintain. And this listener and coach wants to start their own podcast and has struggled with consistency and marketing in the past, and they would like me to share my advice and what works for me. So I thought I'd record a podcast on the topic because I know that there's probably a few of you listening to the podcast that would benefit from me talking about it. And I actually wanted to share some thoughts that I don't think are often spoken about when people are helping others with staying consistent with content or with their marketing. So, the first thing I wanted to share with you all, and the first message that I think is really important if you're wanting to get into content creation of any kind, or you're wanting to be successful as an online coach, and you therefore have to market your business or yourself online, is that creating and getting good quality content out consistently is not easy, especially when life is hectic. And I don't want you to think that I find it easy, because I don't. There are times where the last thing I want to do is create a piece of content. However, that I'm going to come on to this in a second. There's definitely a time and a place where I allow myself not to create content when I really, really am not in the right headspace for doing that, where I've got a lot of other things going on in my personal life that need my time, energy, effort, and attention. However, there are so many times where I don't want to create content, but I do so anyway because of the fact I know that that will benefit not just myself and my business, but other people. It contributes to my greater mission of helping people improve their health, their fitness levels, their performance, and their quality of life. Like, that matters to me so much that I still show up most of the time on the days where I don't want to. And I think that that's a really important part of this conversation. That if you do want to be consistent in creating content or marketing a business, you have to have such a strong why. You have to have such a strong mission statement and purpose so that you're still able to show up on those days where you really don't want to. Because if you're not able to stay consistent, you won't be successful. It's as simple as that in today's day and age. If you're not consistent, you're not going to succeed with an online business. And that is something that you have to accept. So you have to be so passionate about the purpose that your business is serving, or the message or the mission that you the message you want to put out into the world, or the mission that you have. And I'm so passionate about that. Like, I love helping people so much, and it gives me so much joy and fulfillment to feel like I'm leaving the world a better place and I'm changing the lives of others. And that's what drives me forward on the hard days. So make sure, first and foremost, you're really confident on why you want to create content. What is the end goal with that? What purpose are you serving? What message do you want to get out into the world? What do you think you have to offer the world? That's what you need to get really strong on so that you're able to push through on the times where things get hard. And I wanted to share a little bit of my own personal context so that you guys don't think that I don't want you to think that I have it easy, and I don't want you to think that you have to wait for perfect conditions. And I want you to accept the fact that you're going to have to show up even when you don't feel like it at times. So that's why I want to share this little bit of personal context that I'm going to share with you right now and be a little bit vulnerable with. So, over the last year alone, I've lived in three different cities. I have moved more times than I would have liked. I've contributed to caring for my nan when she was sick with cancer, whilst living in a completely different city to her, which was so challenging emotionally, and also meant that every single week I was traveling from one city to another to stay at my nan's, to stay with her and look after her. And whilst I was with her, I couldn't work. Like it was, she needed 24/7 attention and care. So that was a very challenging period of time. And I've dealt with grief following that. And I've also been through a relationship breakdown as well. So that's in this last year alone. And life is never going to be smooth sailing. We're never going to have perfect conditions. So the reason I want to share that with you is because I want you to know that like nobody has perfect conditions, no matter how things look on social media, no matter how easy something looks for somebody else, it is never going to be easy. Doing things that result in personal development, growth, business growth, success are never easy. And it's so important to wrap your head around that. And I believe that one of the most important steps, if you want to be able to show up consistently, is to get really strong on your why, like why you want to do this, and to acknowledge the fact that you're not always going to want to show up and that it's going to feel hard at times. Nothing worth having comes easy. So that's something that's, I think it's really important to recognize. There is, of course, a time and a place for giving yourself permission to take a break, which I have spoken about on the podcast before. I've spoken about how I've had social media breaks. I've spoken about how I've been on holiday and had downtime from work, and that's really important too. However, it's important to get good at calling the shots and giving yourself those breaks. But outside of those breaks, recognizing there's going to be times where you don't want to show up, but you're going to have to regardless. And I'm a huge advocate of allowing yourself to pull back and reset and get your energy right when that's what you genuinely really need. But there are also going to be so many times where you have to show up regardless of how you feel. And you have to develop this skill of learning when it's right to pull back and when it's right to push through, which comes with time, it comes with experience, it comes with having the right guidance to help you call those shots, such as a coach or a mentor. And it comes with improving your self-awareness and the connection that you have with both your body and your mind so that you can listen to its signals appropriately. And an example, just on the flip side of like the pushing through side of things, because I've done a lot of that over the last year, an example of me putting into practice the opposite of allowing myself to pull back. A couple of days ago, I had a really challenging day personally, and a lot of emotion came up for me. I know that if I was to have recorded a podcast, for example, or recorded a talking reel, I wouldn't have shown up as my best self. I wouldn't have shown up with the energy that I want to present when I'm doing face to camera content. And so I didn't force myself to do that. I took some time that day, first of all, to allow myself to express the emotion that was coming up for me so that I didn't get stuck in it. And so that it didn't impact me negatively over the long term. That expression is so important if you want to move through those emotions. And then following that, I spent some time getting myself into a good headspace so that I felt able to show up as my best self following that. And things that helped me personally get into a good headspace to show up again. And actually, I did that very quickly. So I had the difficult day personally, expressed my emotions, sorted that out. And because I was so intentional with letting that emotion come up and letting it out, and then I very quickly, after doing that, moved on to, okay, how can I reset? How can I get my energy back to where I want it to be? And I put certain things into practice that I'm going to come on to. I was able to get my energy back into a place where I was able to show up and do face to the camera content in 2 days. It was 2 days ago that I had the really difficult day. Yesterday I still worked, but I didn't do face to camera stuff apart from a client call, which I had, which I still showed up for. And I always would do. I would never cancel a client call for unless I really needed, if something happened, like someone passed and I was going through grief or something like that, of course, I would reschedule a client call because I wouldn't be able to coach well. But this was a different kind of scenario where I knew I would be able to show up for the client call and coach well and present them with the feedback that they needed, the guidance that they needed to hold space for how they were feeling. That was absolutely fine. But I wouldn't force myself to do the extras like podcast recording and face to camera content on a day like that. So that's where I allowed myself to do more behind the scenes work or written work as opposed to face to camera content like I might have done on another day. So that is an example of a time where I've actually allowed myself to pull back and adapt a little bit and not just show up regardless on a podcast or on face to camera content. But rather than not showing up altogether, I adapted my work. So I chose to do written work, I chose to do behind the scenes stuff where I wouldn't have to be front facing, and then allowed myself to get into the headspace where I felt I was able to show up as my best and give the energy off that I want to give following that. Um, and how I did that was I went for a walk outside. I trained that day. I actually felt so good for training. And I also listened to a podcast that I really like from a neuroscientist who taught. I'll actually link the podcast down below because I really enjoy it. And I think that a lot of you listening to this podcast will probably enjoy it too. It is by a neuroscientist called Emily, and she talks a lot about the power of the mind. And there are some episodes on like resetting your mind and things like that. I listened to one of those podcasts on a walk, and things that I've done previously are doing a meditation from YouTube, or just doing some deep breathing on my own, sometimes sitting outside if it's warm enough because I don't like the cold, and little things like that, and also taking the time to journal. I've done a lot of journaling over the last couple of days, and I always will if I'm going through difficult times personally or professionally, to be fair, as well. But I think it's really important to learn when to push through and when to pull back, to recognize that there are going to be times where you don't want to show up and you're still going to have to. And there are also going to be times where you need to allow yourself to reset your energy. Otherwise, you will just end up producing low quality content and not sustaining that high quality, like this listener recognized. Or you will end up getting to the point of being burnt out, resenting your work, feeling huge lack of creativity and all of that side of things. And on to the next point, which is kind of related to that. Outside of learning when to push through and when to pull back, one of the best things that you can do is create routines that work for you and integrate content creation into your regular schedule rather than seeing it as something that's like an optional extra. So you need to really reframe your thoughts to see content creation as a part of your job while still allowing, and you need to create routines and structures that allow for that while still allowing enough freedom and space for creativity. And the thing that I want to stress here is that there's really no one size fits all in terms of the routines and schedules that you should have in place. Everybody is so different, and it's so important. I talk to a lot of clients who have ADHD, for example, and they don't work well often with planning every inch of their day out. They don't work well with really rigid structures where they plan out what they're doing every single hour of the day. They work better when they have guidelines often, but then room to move things around and be flexible with the type of content that they produce or the specific work that they do at given times based on how they're feeling that day, what their conditions are, and so much more. That, there are lots of different personality traits that different people have that mean that different methods will work. And so copying what someone else does exactly and forcing yourself into other people's routines and structures is never, ever, ever going to work. So what I would have a think about doing is auditing things like, when generally do you feel your best self, you're most able to show up front facing and give off, good energy to be energetic, to communicate clearly and effectively? Like, when are the times of day where you feel best able to do that? For example, I'm best able to do that in the first half of the day. 100%, not a single doubt about it. If I tried, there's the odd occasion where I'll record a podcast later and it'll actually be fine and I'll surprise myself. But like generally, first half of the day is my time for recording podcasts. I am so much more vibrant, energetic, clear-headed, productive. I just give off the best energy in the morning. Like, I'm a morning person. And so I'm never going to schedule to record a podcast in the evening unless, like I said, on the odd occasion I have to. And therefore I have to really make an effort to get my energy right before I show up. But I'm going to naturally be able to show up with better energy in the morning without making quite so much of an effort with it. And so I'll always schedule a podcast in the morning. And I'll also think about, I know that by the end of the week, sometimes I'm a little bit more lethargic, a little bit less creative, little bit less clear-headed, and able to therefore produce the best podcast. And so usually I'll try and do it towards the start of the week, or even sometimes at the weekend when I know that I've got that little bit more time and space, because I find personally that I need that time and space to be able to record a podcast. I can't do it like rushed in a really stacked day of calls, because I'm never going to be able to produce my best work or have the best thoughts and expressions at those times. Today, for example, I have a couple of client calls this afternoon, but I haven't had any calls this morning. And so my thoughts are really flowing. I've got a lot to share, and I know that I am gonna produce a great podcast that hopefully people are gonna enjoy listening. I hope. Let me know if you do or not. Um, so yeah, it's about looking at your behaviors and your energy and your week, and when you feel your best, when you're gonna have the space to do certain things, and creating a schedule that works around that rather than trying to force yourself into what you believe you should be doing or what other people are doing. Another example, like if you're an evening person and you function your best, then what's the point in forcing yourself to get up at 5 a.m.? There is none. So don't try and force yourself into what other people are doing. Think about what works best for you, your brain, and your body, and create routines and structures in line with that. Something that I do personally like doing is I like having certain days for different aspects of my business. So I know, for example, that every Tuesday, that is my client training video feedback day. I have a couple of calls on that day, but I always do my client training video feedback on a Tuesday, and I know that I come around to that every week. The same with client check-ins. I know that I have client check-ins and calls on Wednesdays and Thursdays, and so I need to dedicate a decent amount of time for that. And I'll have other little routines and structures, like, generally I will record content on certain days. But again, it's not about, you shouldn't do your training video feedback on a Tuesday because that's what I do. You should think about when it would best suit your week and when you'd be able to do that task to the best of your ability, as opposed to trying to copy what other people are doing. So I think that's something that is really important. And with content creation as well, one of the best things I could possibly advise you to do is think outside the box with it. You don't have to be sat at a desk with a tripod and perfect lighting to create content. You can do that if you want to go down that route. However, for a lot of people, it's quite unrealistic to stay consistent with content if you force yourself into that kind of content every single time you produce. Whereas if you allow yourself to flex and change with it and create content as you go about your day. For example, I recorded a talking reel last week whilst I was on a run. It didn't require additional time in my day. I was already going on that run. And so I shared my thoughts whilst I was on the run and recorded a talking reel. That is a great example of how you can incorporate. And I think generally, actually, content does better when it seems organic in a lot of circumstances. Not always. There are some creators who are excellent educators that have really professional setups, for example. But I think for a lot of people, now anyway, who are trying to come up into content creation, content generally tends to do a little bit better when it feels a bit more relatable and it feels a bit more organic. So get out of your own way and allow yourself to do it as you go about your day, such as when you're on a run or when you're in a training session, like maybe you film your workouts, you create a routine of that. And again, it's an easy win, it's an easy way of creating content. And think about all the ways in which you could do that. I recorded a morning with me the other week. And again, that's not taking time out of my day. It's me recording the morning that I already have in place. And I know that sometimes it's hard to remember to film everything and things like that. But sometimes you literally just have to get out of your own way and get on with it if you want to be successful. And that's why it's really important to have that strong why, because often if you can't physically like get out of your way and create consistent content, it's often because you don't have a strong enough why or you're not connected enough with like what am I achieving from this? What is the purpose of me creating content? Because if you don't have a real purpose for it, of course you're going to be like, well, I don't want to do that, so I'm not going to do it. Because no one really wants to create content every day. So I think it's really important to remember that. And the thing is as an online coach, if you're an online coach listening to this, your business doesn't survive without social media, and unfortunately, in most circumstances. So it's not that you have to choose Instagram, but you do have to choose a form of content if you want to succeed. It could be Facebook, it could be LinkedIn, it could be TikTok, it could be podcasts, it could be YouTube, it could be Instagram, it could be a combination of those things. But if you want an online business, you're going to have an online presence of some kind. And you could then direct people to, say, an email list or something like that. But you're going to have an online presence unless you've transferred, say, an in-person business to online, which I did actually to start with, but then now I get my leads from online. So yeah, there's definitely an element of kind of you have to suck it up and get on with it. And another thing I think is really helpful with content creation is to see it as an experiment. Take the pressure off yourself and don't limit yourself to producing certain types of content, and also don't get too attached to, say, number of likes, number of saves and interactions and things like that. Literally just see it as an experiment to see how you enjoy best expressing yourself and to see which content does the best. Don't put pressure on yourself for every piece of content to do really well. Literally see it as an experiment to see which type works best for you, and then you can double down on that. That is one of the best ways to have fun with content creation. And guess what? If you have fun with it, you're going to do it more consistently. So have fun with it and give it a purpose beyond the metrics. So even say your business didn't grow as a result of you producing content, and say you didn't get many likes, you didn't get many comments, saves, whatever it is. I would recommend that you think of a reason why showing up consistently is still beneficial for you, even if you don't get any of those outcomes, because then you won't get as frustrated. You won't feel like, oh, this is not working, it's taking too long, this is a waste of my time, I'm resenting this. You won't feel like that because you're like, no, I've still won. I've still gained all of these things from creating this content. And for me, that would be it's building my confidence, it's improving my people skills, it's improving my communication, my speaking skills. It's also allowing me to really confirm my learnings in my own head because I'm sharing them with other people. It's also allowing me to help, like even if one person sees that piece of content, that's a win for me because I've had a positive impact on their life, or maybe I've taught them something or shared an insight or had a nice interaction with them, whatever it is. If it's one person, that's still a win. It's also helping me with my writing skills because I'll write content before I produce it. Sometimes it will be written in itself. There are so many ways that I'm benefiting from consistently creating content that are nothing to do with like my numbers, my business growth, my metrics on Instagram, whatever it is, and getting clear on that makes it feel like it's worth it, regardless of what those surface level metrics say. And that enables you to have more fun with it and to stay more consistent with it as well. So that would be a great bit of advice that I would give you. And I also would recommend having a space to write ideas down whenever they come up. So rather than thinking, oh yeah, I'll create that later, write it down in the notes in your phone. Like if you come up with an idea or a client asks you a question or you have an interaction that makes you think, oh, that would be a good piece of content or whatever it is, write it down. Don't leave it for later. Write it down in the notes in your phone. You can always copy it up elsewhere later in the day. Or write, I like to keep a little journal on my desk, and if any ideas come up, I can write them down physically because I do like writing things in hand. But have a space where you can write things down as they come up. And also, another huge tip I have is don't be afraid of repurposing content. So, if, for example, I have an idea this podcast, let's take this podcast episode as an example. I may well write an Instagram post about this same topic. It obviously will be worded slightly differently, and Instagram is shorter form content, so it won't contain as much detail. However, I will create an Instagram post out of this idea rather than only producing one piece of content out of it. I could also write an email on this idea. So reuse with one idea, don't just create one piece of content, create multiple pieces of content. That is a hack for consistent content creation. And another one is don't be afraid of repurposing content from the past. So I've got posts that I've done, years ago that are still great. Maybe they need rewording a little bit, but I might repurpose that content, recreate a piece of content now on that idea from years ago, but reword it slightly, maybe enhance it a little bit, add some information that I've learned. But the idea is there, so I'm not having to always think of something new. That is a game changer. And sometimes even just reposting the same post that you've done 6 months ago can be an option as well. So don't be afraid to do that. And another way you can create multiple pieces of content out of the same idea is this podcast. It's recording, obviously, because it's going to go up. I could chop that up and put little snippets on Instagram as well. That is another option. So there are loads of ways which you can really capitalize on every idea that you have, as opposed to having to come up with a new idea every single time you post. Another thing that really helps me is being ahead. So it makes the whole process of content creation so much less stressful if you are ahead of the game. So if you have, a couple of posts in the bank that you could post if you needed to, rather than just literally going one day at a time. Personally, what I will share is that I'm often not like, say, planning weeks in advance. That is not how my brain just struggles to work that way. I've tried to force myself into that before. However, I do find it difficult. It's something that I've been through phases with of planning my content out in advance, and having, content prepared for weeks in advance. It's something that I'll probably do again and experiment with. However, right now I am a bit more free flowy with it, and I do have posts banked for if I need them. So like say I didn't come up with an idea. I'll generally schedule something for the next day. So I won't be literally scrambling on the day. But say today I will produce a piece of content for tomorrow so that I'm a little bit ahead and I'm not scrambling. However, I do allow myself the creative freedom to, if I think of an idea today that I want to post, I will allow myself to post it. Because I think that creative freedom for me personally and my mind is important because it allows me to be spontaneous, and that allows me to almost stay consistent with content creation. Whereas sometimes if I'm trying to think of like a month's content in advance, it almost stunts my creativity a little bit, and I struggle with the rigidity of it. You know, I don't want to diagnose myself with anything, but who knows, probably have something at this rate. But anyway, um, yeah, I really struggle with the rigidity of like planning a month in advance. I always have done. I've tried so many times and I just struggle with it a lot. And I know that some of you will probably be able to relate to that. So I personally don't do like really heavy forward planning most of the time, unless I know I'm like going on a holiday, or say I'm like, when I was advertising my social occasions webinar last year, I did plan in advance because I was marketing a very specific thing and I wanted to make sure that the posts were all they flowed really well. So that's where I would plan, say, a few weeks in advance in the run up to a launch, or advertising a webinar or something like that. But generally, outside of that, I allow myself a bit more creative freedom. And I personally enjoy that approach at the moment. It's working for me. So that's fine. But I do have content ideas all the time. I have loads of content ideas in the notes on my phone. So if I ever need one, it is there. I don't just not have any ideas and force myself to think of something on the spot because I find that is very stressful. And that's where you'll get behind and frustrated and feel really like, oh my God, this is so stressful. Like, why do I have to do content? Whereas if you have ideas banked that you can produce at any time, whether it's in written or recording a quick video or something, that will save you. So I do have ideas parked in advance. It's just I don't always create content too far in advance because I find hard for my mind, to be honest. But yeah, I do have ideas. And I also think that there's a lot of power in making sure that you're in the right headspace when it comes to content creation. So I'm really big on getting myself in the right headspace in the morning where possible. There are some mornings where I get up at 20 to 6 and I'm straight to the gym to train an in-person client. On those days, I obviously don't have time to do like my usual morning routine. But outside of that, I will generally journal or go for a walk or do a meditation. I'll sit and read with my coffee. That's like my favorite part of my day. I will do something to get my mind right before I start my day rather than going straight onto my WhatsApps or straight onto my emails or straight into work because that puts me in quite like a heightened reactive state, which is not good for me when it comes to my creativity and the energy I give off throughout the day, the way that I'm able to show up. So personally, for staying consistent with work in general and showing up as your best self in content creation, getting your mind right is so important. So they are my initial piece of advice on staying consistent with content creation and making sure that that content is high quality and not just you're not just producing it for the sake of it. Please let me know what you thought of today's podcast. I really hope that I was able to help some of you in some way or another or provide some really helpful insights. But I would genuinely love to hear from you. So if you have any thoughts, any feedback, if there's something that you learned that you want to share with me from today's podcast, I'd genuinely love to hear from you. And if you are a coach who is interested, I do offer a mentorship service. I offer one-off calls as well as a monthly mentorship service. So if you do want to find out a little bit more about that, please don't hesitate to message me. It would be a pleasure to hear from you and we could just have a little chat, nice casual chat to begin with so you can get to know what it's all about. I never push anyone into anything, and it is a one-to-one service. It's not group. It is literally just me and you working on what you're struggling with as an individual. But let me know if you have any questions. Have a lovely rest of your day, and I will see you in the next podcast.